Can I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 10 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tindel, and along with me is my esteemed co-host, Steve Mayzak.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening and joining.
Steve, today's a huge milestone for us. This is episode 10, and only about a third of podcasts make it to the 10 episode mark. So that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't realize we were blazing a trail here.
Yeah, let me show you this here. Yeah, so I was just curious. I went and looked up the stats, and the stats are pretty crazy for the podcasts that are out there. 25% of podcasts have just one episode, which is wild. I think a lot of people just try and they do it, and then they see how much work it is, and they're like, I don't know, I don't got time for this. Ain't nobody got time for this. But if you go past the one episode mark, 2/3 have 3 or fewer episodes, so most don't make it that far, and only a third of podcasts actually make it to the 10 episode mark. So that's pretty wild.
Amazing. Yeah, that is wild.
I think people really underestimate how much work it is to do a good podcast, and then they just give up, you know?
That's why I give you all the credit for doing post, because I know how much work it is, and it's not easy.
It's so much work in post, especially to do the kind of tight editing that I like, and when take out all the ums and you knows and all of that just to keep it tight. It's a lot of work. But anyway, I love it, and it's a lot of fun, and it's great to talk to people. So that was a fun little stat to look up, and it's nice to make it to this mark. We're excited to be joined today by our guest, Ben Sabrin. He's our first sales leader to join the podcast, and he is really the king of building sales organizations from scratch and growing enterprise sales from nothing to millions of dollars of ARR very quickly. He ran sales at JBoss, where he built it out and got acquired by Red Hat. He was the first sales vice president at MongoDB, which of course has grown phenomenally. It's now something like a $30 billion market cap stock after the IPO. And he was the chief revenue officer at ScaleFT, which was acquired by Okta. Now he's doing it again as the chief revenue officer of ngrok, which we'll learn more about here shortly on the podcast. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chad. Great to be here. Steve, great to talk to you as well. Chad and I obviously have a little history from our MongoDB days, so happy to chat and talk shop.
We've been on some good sales calls together, and of course had a few good steak dinners together here in Manhattan. I remember those early days of MongoDB. Good stuff. I think that a lot of people might not know about ngrok, and so I wanted to give you a chance to just talk about it for a few minutes and kind of tell us what it's all about, what it does, who needs it, why everybody needs it, and where you guys are going.
Yeah, for sure. So at its simplest, ngrok allows anybody to connect anything to the internet. And when I say anything, services, IoT devices, your laptop, and not over a Wi-Fi connection. It's to connect to something else, right? Where you're testing an application. And it's pretty much become ubiquitous for developers. That's really what drew me to join Alan and help grow the business. I mean, today, ngrok is used by over 5 million people. There's over 30,000 customers that pay us. One of the probably biggest testaments to the quality of the software is we've never spent a single dollar on marketing. And up until, hiring me, our customer acquisition costs were 0. So I always joke around as we talk about SaaS metrics. I can only make our magic number go the wrong way.
That's pretty crazy to have a CAC of 0. I mean, that's very, very uncommon.
It is incredibly uncommon. And when I say like 0, I mean 0. We don't even send an email. You sign up for an account, you walk in the front door and you give us money. I don't even send you a note and say thank you, right? There's no getting started guide. There's no email system today. Now, these are all really good problems. And so what we have today is we've got an absolutely world-class developer experience. And that's how ngrok wins, is within minutes, developers instantly see the value. And then that immediately forces them to say, what else can I solve? Like how, this was so great. What other problems can ngrok solve for me? Because this thing just works.
And how does it actually work? What is it doing?
So it's basically setting up a reverse tunnel and allowing you to add a URL to anything and then put authentication in front of that anything and allow you to now have a connection to something that lives somewhere else instantly. right? And, that could be you're building a webhook and it's going to test a webhook. That could be you're building a bot on Slack or Teams or Zoom and it's going to test that connectivity. It could be you're building something in Alexa, right? And you want to test a new skill that you're teaching Alexa for your platform. And Amazon in their documentation tells you to use ngrok.
Really?
Twilio in their documentation tells you to use ngrok. Stripe in their documentation tells you to use ngrok. Zendesk tells you to use ngrok. It's, the list goes on and on and on. Microsoft tells you to use ngrok.
This is in lieu of setting up some sort of VPN or something like that where you could come in the back door.
Yeah.
They're building out a full dev environment where you can have an actual staging environment to test all of your changes, to do that very iteratively in real time. This just allows people to be super productive. And if we think about the current state of development, everything's connected, right? Everything we're building is connected to something else. Being able to completely eliminate complexity associated with the network for developers is tremendously valuable. And that's really our goal, is to completely remove the thinking about the network whatsoever for developers to build connected experiences, connected applications, connected devices, et cetera, et cetera.
So Ben, I actually had a question for you about not ngrok specifically, but you seem to be gravitated towards these developer focused product companies. Why does that interest you so much?
I think there's a couple reasons. Number one, I think that developers, like Mark Andreessen said, are the new kingpins.
Yeah. Developers
are making decisions for businesses. And we're just in the earliest days of digitization. And, the developers are the creatives in this new world of digitization. I just like to think about the art of the possible and the future. And I think that when you have products that really cater to developers, those are a lot of the conversations that you have. That's one component. The other is I like products to do my demand generation for me.
Yeah, who wouldn't?
Instead of having to go, constantly create demand, being able to latch into organic communities really simplifies sales. And I mean, most people talk about open source and the beauty of open source, the open source business model. The biggest innovation around the open source business model, and I would put SaaS and self-service into it as well, isn't that the code is open, or in the SaaS component, it isn't that the initial experience is free or there's a trial and it's frictionless. It's that it just shortens the sales cycle, right? There's still a sales cycle, even in product-led growth. The concept that product-led growth and enterprise sales are mutually exclusive, I think is one of the biggest fallacies that's circulating in tech right now. Right? The key is that you're constantly pushing from both sides and letting things meet in the middle. And you can do that when you have bottoms-up developer-led businesses.
That's interesting you say that, because I was talking to someone yesterday about companies like Datadog where, they started out as purely product-led and now they're building an enterprise sales team slowly but surely. If you look across a long enough time horizon, it almost doesn't matter which approach you start with. If you're all going to end up in the same place, which is both, then does it really matter how you start? I think maybe the market cares for a while, and maybe you get punished later if they see you adding too many enterprise salespeople or your spend starts to invert from R&D to sales and marketing. But I'm just kind of wondering if it actually matters in the long run, as long as we all end up at the same place, which is serving our customers with a great experience and making money to reinvest, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right on. Well, I've been attracted to companies for a lot of the same reasons you have. I mean, I've only ever sold open source, right? And I built my first half of my career on open source tech. So it felt like a really good way to give back, is if you want these open source projects to be uber successful and spread across the world, well, you need to go tell people about them and
totally
help pay for the R&D.
Yeah, I think collectively amongst the three of us, we've sold a lot of free software.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, we have. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw someone on LinkedIn that I follow. He gave a nice rule of thumb, which was the way he thinks about it when he runs these is that he wants to see deals take 1 day for every $1,000. So it's if it's a $30,000 deal, you should be able to close it in 30 days.
Oh, I like
that. It's a $100,000 deal, you should be able to close in 100 days. And that's one of the metrics that he tries to drive his sales teams towards. And I don't know if that's something you had ever thought about.
Multi-million-dollar deals are going to take some time then, huh?
I know. I was just thinking the same thing. Like a decade.
And maybe this is more just for really early stage that aren't doing multi-million-dollar deals yet, really.
For sure.
All right. Anything else you want to say about ngrok? You're hiring?
Yeah, we are hiring across the board. It is one of the greatest engineering teams I've had the pleasure of working with. Our founder, Alan, is a visionary. I mean, what most people don't know is for the first 4 years, ngrok was Alan. He built a business by himself, and it got to a point where he couldn't really invest in his time in building the product because he was pulled in so many different directions in terms of serving customers and billing and invoicing. And so he's like, all right, I want to build a business. And he started building a business. We're about 25 people. We're bootstrapped. We will probably change the bootstrap moniker in the beginning of next year to really invest in growth, because we've started to see a tremendous amount of signal, both within just our self-serve customer base, as well as enterprise customers that want to do more with the platform. And, we're moving into a world where hyper distributed is going to be the norm, right? We went from everything's in my data center, and my data center may even be in my office, to it's in my data center that maybe is in this remote location, to there's the cloud. We're going to put a bunch of stuff in the cloud, but I still have my data centers. And now it's like, well, I need to deploy stuff everywhere as I build new applications that maybe need like 5G connectivity. How do I get that compute closer to the edge? As we continue to digitize out in the marketplace, we're going to be building robots to drive cars, obviously, and serve people in restaurants, and take things off ships. And all of that stuff is connected and needs to be controlled and monitored remotely. There's cameras everywhere. Networking and connectivity is critical, and we need to make that easy and secure. And that's what we do.
How do you think about there was this big AWS outage earlier this week, which took down a wide swath of the internet, not just Amazon stuff, but all kinds of customers that run on AWS. And
yeah, we run on AWS, but we were fine because we actually have a global network that we built on AWS.
So one region goes down doesn't cause you a problem.
Yeah, just shift all the traffic to another region where things aren't down. I would have thought when I saw that, my initial instinct was, oh man, the support queue is going to get really, really loud today. And then I looked on the Eng channel and they're like, no, not affecting us. We're good.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to run those types of large scale events, like to simulate them and see how your software is going to behave when they happen. So when it does happen and you see your stuff just work, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I was happy. ngrok wants to be the edge cloud. And, if we are going to be the edge cloud at some point, there's going to be a compute component to what we do, whether that's ourselves or through partnership or whatever. And so in scenarios like that, yeah, we have a global network. We're going to continue to build on top of that global network. That global network today lives in Amazon, but it eventually may live, in some other places as well.
So you're going after the CDNs of the world as well, then? Is that how we should think about it? You're going to take on CloudFront and Akamai and those?
I don't know that we necessarily, short term want to be in the content distribution business. Moving services to the edge, things like load balancing, security, encryption, and making those primitives very easy for developers to consume without having to change their application, or authentication is another service that'll be out on the edge. That's pretty powerful. And I wouldn't put a CDN in that category today.
Yeah, we had a few episodes ago, we were talking with a telco architect, and he was talking about how much 5G is dealing with allowing applications to come to the edge, and how much computing is really coming out to even where the cell towers are, for example. So that it's ultra fast when you're talking to an app from your phone.
Yeah, for sure. So the future's exciting. It's fun.
Well, we have a recurring segment here on this show called a 10K Breakdown, which we're going to do for a few minutes today. We're going to be talking about ZoomInfo. Okay, ZoomInfo was originally founded in 2007 as Discover.org, and then acquired another company called ZoomInfo, and then rebranded themselves using the ZoomInfo name before their June 2020 IPO. They were the first IPO to happen after the COVID pandemic lockdown. So they IPO'd just a few months after the lockdown started. And it was great. I mean, it was great to see them take that risk in some sense to say, hey, we're getting back to business here. And they raised $1 billion in new capital. They had a blog post talking about why are they going public during the pandemic. And it was basically, we need to get back to business. They want society to get back to business. Everybody's shifting to work from home. And all of their customers want to get back to business and get back into selling stuff now that it's been a few months. And I thought that was just a great, take on the whole situation. We know it's hard for everybody, but let's just try to get things going again.
Yeah, they're actually, DiscoverOrg is headquartered now ZoomInfo is headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, which is not a very well-known place. I used to live there for a number of years, actually. When you tell people Vancouver, they always think Canada. So just to set the record straight, there is a company actually in Vancouver, Washington.
That's just like a few minutes across the river from Portland, Oregon, right?
There's some very intelligent tax planning professionals that live in Vancouver, Washington, because you get the best of both worlds, which is right. You get no state income tax in Washington and you get no sales tax in Oregon. So you just drive over the border to buy everything and you go back and you've got a great situation.
Ben, you left out the best part. If you live in Vancouver, you don't have to pump your own gas because you can drive over the border, have someone pump your gas, and then drive back.
Oh, so Oregon is full service?
Yeah, Oregon and I think New Jersey are the last holdouts.
So I grew up in Jersey. It was funny when I first went to college in Indiana, and I pulled up to a gas station. I'm like, what the hell do I do?
I know. It's funny. When I moved down here to Phoenix, I was joking the first time we got gas. I'm like, what, I have to pump my own gas? What kind of barbaric state is this?
Yeah, for sure.
I have never understood these laws that say that you're not allowed to pump your own gas. I mean, every time we drive through New Jersey, I'm like, why am I sitting here waiting 5 minutes for somebody to come over here and pump my gas? Well, let me just get out and pump it.
It seems like some old law, kind of like, horses can't turn left on the sidewalk on Thursday. Like, it's just a holdover from some arcane lobbyist that won. I think
the gas station attendant lobby is very strong in these two states.
Very strong.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, their IPO seems to have worked. They IPO'd with a price of $21, and it's increased about 3x in the last 18 months. Of course, buoyed by an up market, I'm sure, but their business seems to be doing well. They provide a 360-degree view of companies that are out there, coupled with analytics, trying to shorten sales cycles and increase win rates. This is just, I'm reading from their 10K here. Increase win rates by enabling sellers and marketers to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. Now that's a great little segment. And by the way, let me preface this with saying none of us are investment professionals. We're not giving advice here, and our opinions are our own. This is not a stock that I own. Sometimes we do 10K breakdowns on stocks that we own. This is not a stock that I own. I don't know about you guys.
No, I don't own any.
No.
But I think one of the powerful things about it is it lets you see what technology companies are using. So if, as salespeople here, if you're trying to run a campaign against a competitor or you want to target users of certain technologies in your campaign, you can do that. I would want to just give a couple numbers here, do a little rundown of the numbers before we dive in and talk about it. They right now have about a $27 billion market cap, similar to what MongoDB is. They had 660 million in revenue this year, and they've been adding about 200 million a year each year for the last couple of years. This statistic was awesome. 99% of their revenue comes from subscriptions. Yep. I know everyone's always trying to get that number to be as high as possible. That's about as high as you can get it. They don't have much in the way of professional services or any sort of low margin businesses here. They've grown their R&D budget significantly in the last few years. It was only 6 million in 2018. Now it's 90 million. So they're definitely investing in the technology. They've incurred significant net losses in each year since their inception, including net losses of $36 million in 2020 on about 500 million in revenue last year. So less than 10%. It's not terrible. And hopefully they'll get that number up and start breaking even soon. They call out very clearly that no one customer is responsible for more than 1% of their revenue. So they don't have any big whales that might present a risk if that whale chooses to leave as a customer. 90% of their revenue comes from customers in the United States. So seems like they have a lot of opportunity for international growth if they want to go that way. Same thing, their employees are mostly here. 1,700 employees, 87% of them in the United States. And it's funny, they have a section in the 10K which is called the adjusted operating income and adjusted net income. And I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett, but I'm an even bigger fan of Charlie Munger, his partner. And Charlie Munger is famous for this quote. He hates when anybody talks about adjusted earnings or this EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. He really hates that. And his quote is, if every time you hear the word EBITDA, you just substitute the word bullshit earnings, you'll understand what people are talking about.
I think you would understand any presentation using the word EBITDA if every time you saw that word, you just substituted the phrase bullshit earnings.
So anytime I see that in a report, I'm just like, oh, now we're going to talk about bullshit earnings. Let's talk about your bullshit earnings. And it makes it so much easier to think about. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Right. Earnings before all the stuff you have to pay for.
Exactly. Well, they're like, how can depreciation not be something that you consider? It's actually the worst type of expense you can have because you have to front the cash for it up front before you make any money on it. It's the worst thing you can have is a high depreciation expense. Why would you subtract it out as if it's economically irrelevant? But, everybody tries to play all these numbers and it's a big game.
Well, I picked up on a few things from the 10K. So number one is, like every company on the planet right now, they've tried to put AI ML in the first few paragraphs of their annual report, and ZoomInfo did the same thing. And I think it's kind of funny because, I've worked with this company before, and I'm sure they do have AI ML at this point. But, the way they describe it is basically like, we're going to go collect a bunch of data, we're going to massage that data, we're going to put it in a database, and then we're going to offer it up to customers. And they have this thing called human in the loop, which also was interesting because like AI ML plus humans, and it's hard to tell who's doing the work. Is it the human or is it the AI? But I do think it's interesting because one of the things they talk about is accuracy, and they mention competitors like LinkedIn with Microsoft and a few others, but accuracy in this data is, I think, really critical. And Ben and Chad, you guys all know this, like when we're using data like this to go and make decisions about how we're going to work with an account and offer up some of the info, like if it's inaccurate, you look like an idiot in front of the customer. And so accuracy is critical. And I think that's one of the things that I would think they'll continue to harp on for a while is, our data is the most accurate. It could be one of their unique differentiators. They can call it human in the loop, whatever they want, but I do think that's a really important aspect of services like this. I don't want inaccurate information. The challenge I have is, how do you prove that it's accurate? You won't really know until you get in front of the customer and start bouncing these things off of them and seeing how they react. So that's kind of interesting.
I wonder if their lack of business internationally is driven by privacy laws, like specifically is GDPR an inhibitor to ZoomInfo having a business in Europe, or is it just they haven't focused in those international markets?
I think it's a little bit of both. Well, not in the main section, but I scrolled much further down, and they have a section on risks to the business, and most of these things are boilerplate. COVID could impact our business, and blah blah blah. Someone important in our company might die, etc. But they did explicitly call out the various data privacy laws being implemented, like GDPR, and also they called out the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and as something that might be a risk for them if more countries add these rules. But to be honest, I actually think about it more like it's a strength for them because they're already in this world, and once they start complying with some of these rules, that just makes a bigger moat around them and harder for someone else to come into the business.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. I would say it would be an opportunity. So if I was reading this and I was a seller for a company that helped streamline compliance with privacy regulations, I would really try to build a narrative and a point of view around how I could be an enabler to helping you grow internationally, and you could tie that directly into the size of the revenue opportunity that could exist internationally.
Yeah, Ben, I completely agree. I mean, they mentioned privacy like 40 times. They mentioned GDPR, I think 7 times in their annual report, and I was thinking the same thing yours. Like, privacy is going to be, and compliance is going to be a huge thing for them. So if you have software and technology that you can use to help them with that, then I'm sure they'd be all ears, right? And this human in the loop thing is interesting because while it sounds good from a marketing perspective, and yes, we know that we can do better than AI in a lot of things still, I would imagine that they're trying to slowly but surely replace the human mind in their loop with AI, ML. So that's going to be a constant thing that they're going to have to work through. And this is, again, where the accuracy thing comes into play, because humans, we're just error prone, right? We're going to make mistakes.
So I think their human in the loop is actual researchers on the phone trying to collect data and verify data. So literally dialing phone numbers of people, verifying, going to LinkedIn, verifying where they work, then bringing together the email domain and things like that to cleaning their data. I think they do a decent amount of that, and they make it sound much sexier. Human in the loop sounds much better.
Yeah, that's right. It's basically like, hey, is this Joe? Joe, is your boss Sally? Yes. All right. Then we're accurate.
Rock on. Have a good day.
Well, I think every company struggles with this. Even Facebook. I was reading the Stephen Levy Facebook book a couple months ago, and that was one of their big struggles in terms of monitoring activity on the platform. Was they have AI, right, that can try to look for posts where people are, doing something bad, even let's say planning a terrorist attack or something, right?
Yeah.
But if your AI can only read certain languages and terrorists are planning things in languages that your AI can't parse, then you're not going to find it. So you need humans who speak those languages in every country in the world, basically, to be able to monitor these things and look at what's going on and make a judgment call about whether it's a problem or not. And, for this, like, they're trying to parse companies' org charts and stuff, and who knows what else. I don't know where they get their data sets from, but I imagine if going into these other countries is a huge language problem for them.
Yeah, I think it probably is. The other thing that's interesting is, they mentioned in their annual report how many third-party services they rely on to collect this data. And I think as GDPR and these privacy laws become more and more the norm, it's going to be really hard for them to estimate how much expense that's going to have in R&D. Because, like, how do you know, right, when the next law is coming out? And then how do you know that the services that you're relying on to build your database are actually compliant? And I don't know how far the web of audits will go out, right? Like if ZoomInfo got audited or one of their partner companies got audited, what are the implications there? I think that's an interesting kind of take and a risk for their business for sure. And then, they're going to have to adopt technologies that are highly secure and highly auditable. And that's going to be a bigger expense for them in R&D. So those are some risks I see right away. But again, Chad, to your point, it could be a competitive advantage for them because they're already there. I just don't know how much these things are going to slow them down.
Yeah, and I think then the opportunity, the flip side of that is we're all in the business of selling software from a B2B perspective, right?
Yep.
Or services or what have you. And if I can get a relationship with a ZoomInfo, and that can basically allow me to seamlessly communicate with people that didn't opt in because they've solved that problem for me, and we're purchasing that right from them. I don't know if those things can kind of carry through. It could potentially add more value to their sales process, where it's like, hey, B2B, company, you can comply with privacy regulations in terms of being able to market to people if you get the data from us.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of those unique and defensible differentiators.
Yeah, I don't know if that's reality, but I'm just, spitballing.
Yeah.
Have you guys used their product, either of you?
I have.
Do you like it?
I like it. I do find the accuracy thing a bit wonky. Like, I think that's the hardest part or one of the hardest parts of their job. And one of the things I noticed early on when using the product is accuracy is not great. It's good. It's not great. People change jobs too fast. It's hard to keep track.
What did you use it for?
I used it for account-based intel and research. Like, who reports to who, what departments are they in, what technologies have they purchased, stuff like that, to understand as much of the landscape as I can, so that when I go into an organization and start asking questions, I ask questions that are relevant to the ecosystem that's in there. So it's like, go in and verify what you found in a way that hopefully doesn't make you look stupid if the information's wrong, but it can kind of give you a head start, I think, in your knowledge that you then would turn into some sort of value proposition for your product back with the customer.
Yeah, I mean, I think account mapping, data cleansing, I'm in a sales cycle with them right now in terms of looking to evaluate their product, because we have a tremendous amount of data most of which is just, names and email addresses of users on our platform. And I want to, before I take all of that and load it into some sort of revenue operations system, I want to enrich that data and I want to clean that data on the way in, as opposed to after the fact. What I learned, I didn't realize about ZoomInfo, is they're trying to roll up the entire RevOps stack. They have a chat alternative to Drift. They're trying to build email cadence competitors to both SalesLoft and Outreach, trying to be just a one-stop shop for everything. And then they just bought Chorus, so to get into the conversational intelligence side of the house, which, look, I would say as a buyer, as a CRO, I'm a big believer that less is more, right? The less places that my people need to focus, the better we are. And so I do think there's a big opportunity within this whole MarTech space or revenue operations space for consolidation. I personally would like to buy less than all of a sudden I've got 7, 8, 10, all of a sudden balloons to 20 tools that my teams in sales and marketing need to interact with on a daily basis.
That's a great point, Ben. I mean, I've heard sales reps and SEs complain years over years about the number of tools they have to use, right? And if you think about it, a lot of people think Salesforce is not for sales reps, it's for sales leaders to be able to predict their business and make it repeatable. So I think this type of stuff can help there. But if they were able to own that, then why not make it easy and integrated? I agree. Like the Chorus acquisition is very interesting because those tools, while I hated them when I first heard about them because it felt very Big Brother, as a leader, I rely on them a lot now.
Yeah, especially for coaching.
Yep.
If you're in the business of building new products and you want to start to better understand messaging and what's resonating with your newer products, conversational intelligence is great, especially when you can automate getting that signal back with some good intelligence. Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I love all these sales tools. The one thing I hate is the chatter on Salesforce.
Oh, that's a terrible product.
It's awful. And every time I've had a sales leader who's like, we're going to use chatter. I want everybody in chatter. I want people putting chatter messages on opportunities and adding each other. And it's just like, it's
Chatter's
a nightmare.
So bad they just spent how many billions of dollars to buy stock?
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Like, all right, let's kill this thing.
God, couldn't die soon enough.
Yeah. The only sales leaders that ever push chatter, in my experience, are the ones from Salesforce. So that's how bad it is.
It's terrible.
I think Slack's going to be their new interface.
Yep.
And I think it actually should be, for all of these tools, Slack should be the place that most people are spending their time, right? From a sales and sales operations and sales engineering perspective.
I thought it was funny. They called out as one of the other risks, said, quote, our management team has limited experience managing a public company. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, sometimes people take their first company public. That's how it is. But it reminded me of that meme with the dog hitting a golf ball saying, I have no idea what I'm doing. Just made me laugh when I read it. It struck me as funny.
Yeah, that's one of those sentences that's absolutely put in by the lawyers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the whole risk section is basically written by lawyers. No question about it.
Yeah. I feel like there's a template somewhere that we don't know about that all lawyers use for all of these annual reports for the risks section. And then they just add 3 things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other number that I thought was interesting, they talk about their net annual retention rates being, for the last 3 years, 102%, 109%, 108%. So they're sort of in this just a little over 100% mark for the last 3 years, which means that they're great at retaining their current customers, right? Once they get a customer, they don't leave, but it doesn't seem like they're really, upselling and growing it.
Yeah, I would say historically if you look at comps, those net retention rates are on the low end.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you typically want to strive for 115 plus. Best in class are in the 120s, 130s.
So they're not terrible. They're not losing customers, but it's definitely like middle of the pack, maybe.
Yeah.
I do wonder, though, like maybe part of this is sales leaders and sales ops leaders basically deciding that, yes, this data is valuable, but it's only so valuable.
Correct.
There's only so much I'm willing to pay for it. And ZoomInfo claims in their 10K that they have basically no competitors, but then they claim they have competitors. So it's kind of interesting to me that I don't really see a viable competitor to them right now with all the work that they do and the data they collect. But as AI and ML actually does get better and you can automate more and more of this stuff, I imagine the value of their service today will go down, which is why they have to keep adding things like Chorus and other things. And if they...
Well, I think the biggest pressure to that is LinkedIn. From just an overall database perspective, has everything you need. Obviously, piecing it together and organizing it is non-trivial. And that's where, surfacing the data in the way ZoomInfo does with reporting structures and things along those lines, there's some value. It's not like you can't build that yourself, right? So yeah, I do believe you get to a point where it's like, how valuable is this business? So then it's like, okay, let's use data as a loss leader per se, right? To start selling all the other things that people need, right? From a RevOps perspective, which is probably why they've taken the tack that they've done with the acquisitions that they've made.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another risk to their business is actually the trend of more and more product-led growth companies. Because like if you're just leading with product and you have no enterprise sales or marketing, you don't need their tools, as far as I can tell. Like I didn't read anything in there that led me to believe that they have some sort of API that you can hook into with your product and make decisions in an automated programmatic fashion to do something different. Maybe they do, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's where I think from a competitive perspective, I think the company that can do things like that is Clearbit.
Yeah.
Which you can tie in, via API and through segment, and there's a lot of power. You can basically enrich all traffic that's coming to your site. When you're having chat with somebody, you can get the info on who that person that actually is on the site that you're chatting with is. And I think ZoomInfo can do some of that as well. But Clearbit was definitely built in a way for developers to interact and bring it in much more seamlessly than what ZoomInfo does.
Yep.
How much does their product cost? Like, okay, you have about 25 people working at your company. What's a ballpark for what, they would charge a company that size?
I have no idea. I haven't gotten that. I haven't gotten to get a quote yet. In the past, I'm trying to think, when I've bought Discover.org, there's a platform fee. It's usually at least like $25K plus, and then a per seat cost, comes with a certain number of seats and then a per seat cost. But I don't have relevant recent information.
It's funny. I'm a big fan of poker. I was watching the World Series of Poker last month, and Jamie Kerstetter is one of the professional players that they have come on as a commentator. And she was saying, what's $31,000 anymore these days? You can't even buy a JPEG for that. Making fun of NFT prices. It's hilarious.
Funny.
That is funny.
That's it for the 10K breakdown. Let's dive into some topics where we talk to Ben about how he approaches being a sales leader and in these early companies. Steve, I think you have some questions you wanted to start with.
Yeah, maybe I think a good place to start where we could jump off from in a lot of different directions is, Ben, just in your experience, how has enterprise sales culture changed over the decades that you've been leading teams?
Oh, man.
Yeah, let's start with an easy one.
That's a loaded question. now, I think the biggest change that's happened over the years is we've built these multi-tiered sales organizations with BDRs and SDRs and ISRs and enterprise reps. It used to be where if you were an enterprise seller, you hunt and kill, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And now we've basically said, enterprise sellers, no, you need to focus on the relationship and the structure and the strategy. Like, we're going to get others to hunt for you. And honestly, there is some value there when you're freeing time. But I think that at the end of the day, everybody needs to be prospecting and building pipeline. The organizations that I think consistently crush it are the ones that, yes, they may have multi-tiered sales organizations, but all AEs, need to generate a huge chunk of their own pipeline, usually in order of 50%. But, I do think we've significantly increased our costs from a sales perspective because of all the different layers. And that may be a little controversial. I think a little differently than probably a lot of my peers. My goal as we build ngrok is, how do I build a 9-figure business with 25 reps or less? And I do think that, it's possible, because the other thing that's changed is we have so much more information at our fingertips than we did in the past. Figuring out who works for what, or who's the CTO or CIO or chief security officer of your target, that's trivial, right? That information is everywhere. Even figuring out who that knows that person is fairly trivial today. So one of the biggest challenges that exist in the modern sales organization is focus. And how do you basically surface the true signal in all the data? And that's where automation can come into play.
Yeah, that's fair. I think one of the things I've seen too is that there's this kind of generation of sales reps that we're used to or taught to go after the executive buyer as fast as possible. Like, get to the person with the money as fast as you can, and then sell top down. And, coming from open source where developers are the new kingmakers, if you believe in that, most of my experience in sales has been bottom up, right? You start with the developer and you work your way up. You build champions, and then those champions should sponsor you up into the people with the purse and, the people that ultimately make the decision. The number of reps I've seen in my career that come in with this idea that I'm going to go right to the CTO or the C-level exec or VP is, I think, slowly but surely kind of thwarted their efforts, right? Like, I've seen a number of times in my career recently, especially where you go too high too fast. And especially when you're competing with the incumbents, if that person has a relationship with the rep or some leader at that company that they bought the software from, and you go in saying, hey, you guys are using this new little thing here in this small department in your organization, and I want you to pay me for it, they'll say, well, thanks for telling me that we're using it. I'm going to go squash that project. And because we have a policy where we only use this vendor. And that's a shift in mentality, I think, that has happened over the last probably decade plus, at least for me. Ben, you've obviously been selling open source for longer than I have.
That is part of the, if you look at the medic playbook, right, that is obviously proliferating our industry right now. I mean, it's trying to find that economic buyer as soon as you possibly can. And I don't disagree. I think there are some, there's some advantages of doing it, and there's some trade-offs, obviously. The one thing you always have to be mindful of, if you are talking to very senior people and you're talking about, non-greenfield tech, meaning they already have a product or a way that they're solving the problem that you're trying to sell whatever you have to solve for them. If they made that decision, that executive, you're basically telling them they made the wrong decision.
That's a great point.
And that's, you need to be really mindful of that. And the only way, I think, to really, change those things, it has to be in some ways bottoms up, or you've got to come from the side and influence that in some way, shape, or form from a peer of the economic buyer, if that peer has pain associated with what's in place today. Now, if you are, if it's greenfield, if they haven't made a decision, like in your business, from an observability perspective, they have monitoring, but they haven't gotten into observability, right? And it's greenfield. Yeah, I would be trying to identify the economic buyer and tying my story to real metrics as soon as I possibly could. But if they're already a Datadog customer and that enterprise buyer or executive buyer is the person who made that decision, you're going to want to find other ways in.
That's right. And I see this fairly often as like salespeople and sales engineers, they don't challenge the customer enough when they are maybe feigning interest. Maybe it's real interest, but like, are you really about to change your entire observability platform or metrics platform from one vendor to another to save X dollars? Like, that's a lot of work. Is it really worth it? Would you be better off going back to your current vendor and asking for a discount as a first step? Because that's going to happen at some point, right? Like, I remember when I was at Elastic, we were competing with Splunk a lot, and we would find out at the 11th hour that Doug Merritt himself would be calling into customers saying, there's no way you're switching to Elastic. Here's a 80% discount. Like, okay, that's fun. And we just wasted 90 days trying to get this deal when we never really challenged them on, is this really worth changing? And even if you, Mr. or Mrs. Champion, believe in this product so much, are you going to be able to challenge the incumbent at the leadership level? Because most developers don't know how to sell things up, right? They just have passion about technology, but that's not enough in every case. You have to understand how to justify that passion into some sort of business metric that your leader can first understand and then be willing to put their budget behind. And that's not a skill that everybody has.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a great point.
You mentioned MEDDIC. I just wanted to let people know what that is. Maybe some people haven't heard about it. Here it is. MEDDIC was what it started as: metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, etc. It's a sales methodology. It's changed over time. People have added other letters to it. So now it's sometimes you'll see 2 C's. They've added competition. They've added a P for paper process. So that's something, if you guys haven't heard about it, you can go take a look at it. It's MEDDIC.com.
Yeah, and I would say I would categorize it not as a sales methodology, but a qualification framework.
Yeah, that's how I talk about it too.
It's a way to really qualify deals and as a leader, get your reps to think in those terms is going to get them to ask those hard questions. Rewinding to what's, some of the big changes in sales over the years. And I don't know if this is a new thing, but in general, you can't be afraid to ask the hard question, right? You can't be afraid to ask the question that you don't want the answer to. And I think more and more people fall into the camp, like they don't want to be told no. So they're not going to ask the hard question because they want to, people are looking at their activity. And the longer I talk to these people, the more activity I have, even if there's no deal here, it'll still show up good in my activity metrics.
Ben, you're speaking my language. That's like my love language right there. Is ask the hard questions.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. It's like I always liken it to when you're in high school, or maybe not high school, but like grade school, where you have a note that you pass to a girl, at least in my case, where it'd be like, do you like this person? Yes or no? And if you remember, I've done this once in my life, and I remember the fear that I had of doing it. And the fear is basically like, what if it goes wrong? My mind's telling me all the things that are going to happen if they say no. And that is so scary. I think it's like public speaking. I just don't want to do it because my mind tells me all these bad things are going to happen. And I'd much rather just run through the sales cycle blissfully unaware because of what you said, which I think is a really interesting point, is like metrics. If I'm being told I need to have 6 meetings with a prospect and that's a good sign and that increases my chances of winning, then I need to get to that metric. And that's maybe more important than asking the hard question.
Yeah, that hard question is definitely not happening until the 6th meeting.
That's right. So maybe this is a good segue, Ben. Like, what kind of activities or how do you look at performance for your sales team with data, not just talking to the individual?
First and foremost, pipeline percent, your pipeline's growing, and then your conversion metrics on your pipeline. To me is the most important. I have never been an activity guy because personally, it never resonated with me. I'll share an anecdote. So I started my career as a technical recruiter. I was consistently in the top 5 performers in the company, even as a junior, right out of college. My initial manager, we had call tracking software. And he would sit me down in our reviews and he'd be like, your call numbers, your dials aren't really where they need to be. And my response would always be, right, but is my revenue where it needs to be? Right.
Yeah. That number is way more important.
Right. I didn't talk to as many people, but all the conversations that I had were meaningful. I would talk to people for an hour and do it in the evening when they weren't working so I can really get them to open up. And so I'm a much bigger believer in quality over quantity. Now, look, there is a component, especially I think at the lower level of the sales rung, where activity data is a predictor of outcomes. I don't believe that that's the case in enterprise sales per se. There is some activity metrics that are helpful, overall tracking your touch points, and it all depends on what stage of the sale you're at. Right? If it's a later stage deal and you're not seeing consistent touch points to move the thing forward, right, on the schedule, then obviously you're going to use those activity metrics to interject. And there's some pretty good tooling out there now from the Clarys or the People AIs of the world to help surface some of that from a leadership perspective, which I think is pretty valuable.
Yep, I agree. I think it's funny, if you hit your number, all sins are forgiven. It's usually the case.
Totally. I mean, at the end of the day, quota and quota attainment are the ultimate benchmark for sales. The way I like to always categorize it is if you're hitting your number, That's awesome. Let's figure out, are there areas where we can do better, right?
Yeah.
But typically when you have people that are not hitting your number, then you want to really start inspect.
That's right.
The behavior, and is this behavioral? Is this activity? Is it skill? And start to interject help where you possibly can.
That's the really tricky part, I think, about having top performers in sales is the tendency is to take what they're doing and use that as the model of what good looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, okay, everyone else in the org needs to do what they did. And it's like, well, I've seen some of these reps where I can't even explain how they're so good at their job. I worked with a rep at Elastic that was probably the best rep I've ever seen in terms of hitting their number time and time again or overachieving. And I tried to many times sit down and think, like, what is it that they're doing over and over again consistently that's just so effective? And it's tricky because, like, I'm not there with them in every meeting. Of course, I'm only there when they bring me in. And one of the things I was able to, I think, pretty much tie it down to at least one attribute is relationship building and like how that person builds relationship and rapport with their customers. And I think also tenure in the industry, right? Like at that point, he had been in the industry for so long, his Rolodex and his relationships that he's very good at maintaining just continue to pay dividends, and he knows how to pick good technology companies. So it's like, oh, hey, Mr. and Mrs. VP, I just changed companies and I know that you guys are using this new technology that I'm now selling. Let's have a conversation. I think that's also a part of how the rich get richer, so to speak.
You went through this path where you were one of the top reps and got promoted and went into management and VP and all of that, and that's very common. But is that the right way to do it? Like, why are we taking the best reps and moving them out of that job and into management?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so it's a conversation I always have when the best reps say, I really want to get into leadership. The first question I ask back is, all right, do you want to manage, 10 people just like you or whatever the number is, right?
Yeah.
We make them think about, because usually the best reps are more high maintenance than others. And it's a behavior that you don't want to really quell because, you want them taking that same behavior externally, right?
Yeah.
You want them to want more from the customer, right? So you can't really kill. They want more, from a compensation perspective. They want more from a territory perspective. They want more accounts, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So I talk about that. And then the other thing they have to think about too is, like, typically, at least first line managers, you're not going to make as much money as the best rep.
That's right.
It's just part of the deal. And maybe your compensation will come, in other areas from an equity perspective. You'll get a better equity position than the individual contributor.
Well, but I'm just wondering if being a great rep is really a prerequisite to being a great manager. And I don't think it is, but it seems to be that that's the path that most companies go down.
I don't think that it's a prerequisite. I do think that to be a great leader, specifically in the sales arena, you have to earn the respect of the people under you. And typically the way you're going to earn that respect is that you've done it. Right?
Yeah, you have a track record.
You have a track record. You helped build this company. All of our big logos are deals that you actually did yourself, right? Yes, I'm going to listen to what you're saying because you obviously know what's going on here. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like in that specific company. But I do think there's an element that people want to work for people they know that have sat in their seat. Sometimes sitting in that seat gives that person the empathy to understand what the rep is going through as well. So I just think it helps create a better situation. But I don't say it's an absolute prereq. I mean, I think there's definitely probably some amazing sales leaders out there that were never the best rep.
I think it's tricky too. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is where you have these amazing reps that just seem to be able to sell without any obstacles. And then everybody has this inclination to say, okay, you're going to go enable the rest of the field on how you do your job. Like, well, you're stealing time from your best rep to now go teach everybody else. And that's also a tricky balance because you don't want to take them out of the field too much. And I do wonder if there's maybe a model that maybe someone will experiment where you take the best reps and I don't know how to do this, but I'm just thinking out loud, like give them less quota or give them less account responsibility so that you can free up some of their time to actually go coach others without making them a people manager. Because I think, knowing what good looks like from a sales perspective and being a great example of that is different than being a great people manager.
Yeah.
And I see a fair number of amazing reps that just want to get into leadership, and I think it's the title more than anything else, get in and fail. And then they leave the company because you're not going to get demoted. It's just too hard of an ego hit, I think, in my experience. And you basically are potentially going to lose your best people if you promote the wrong ones. And I don't know, like, what attributes you look for, Ben, when you're saying, hey, I have this amazing rep, they want to be a leader. What are some of the things you think about as far as the characteristics they need to have to be that great leader, besides just being an amazing rep?
Couple things. Number one, they need to be an outside of the box thinker, somebody who, consistently overcomes obstacles that others don't. I think people that are really good pattern matchers is another. Somebody has to have the desire and the want to work on behalf of others, right? I mean, when you're a leader, you need to be a servant to your team, to your people. And you got to try to figure out if somebody has those capabilities in the process. And sometimes it'll show itself, right? It's the rep that, goes out of their own way to help their peers. Those are characteristics that you constantly monitor for.
But reps are so different. I mean, I think back to when we were at MongoDB. I remember the top 2 performing sales reps, they were
polar opposites.
Polar opposites. I mean, crushed his number, I think, with like 3 deals.
Yep.
And crushed her number with like 100 deals.
Yep.
I guess where I'm coming from is if you're a successful sales rep because you do what you do really well, maybe you're like the rep that Steve was talking about that's great at relationships, or maybe you were an SA who came over to the rep side and you're successful because you really understand the tech. Whatever it was that made you successful, it doesn't mean that you know how to coach people who are good for other reasons. That's kind of the risk there. People who are really good at something naturally aren't necessarily the best teachers of it because they never struggled with it.
Yeah.
Any people manager has to understand that different approaches need to be applied to different people to get the best out of them.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Ben, one question we wanted to ask you was about taking sales engineers and the sales engineers that show a lot of potential to be a great rep. Have you seen this work and not work? And I'm curious to hear your perspective on why it does work when it works and why it doesn't.
So I have seen it work. I had somebody at Mongo, he was an SE, and we turned him into a sales rep, and he did great. I think what made him successful was, he had some of the really important traits of a seller, which, he was competitive. He really wanted to win. He was really curious. I think it becomes successful where, they can somewhat be their own SE, but I actually tried to, pull people away from that notion.
Yeah.
Because I do think that at times, 2 heads is better than one. I mean, where I think it fails, I mean, there's plenty of SEs that I've seen. They're like, well, I want that big check for the big deal we just did, and that big deal wouldn't have happened without me, right? And then they realize that like all the things that went into getting that deal done, whether it be the relationship building, whether it be, the hardcore contract negotiation, non-technical components of the sale, they think they can do, but they don't really understand. And then they get thrust into it. And it's like, oh, wait a second. I don't like this. I don't want to, as an SE, you don't have to ask for the order. People don't tell the SE no, right? Yeah. The SE doesn't necessarily have to ask as hard a question, through the sales process as the seller, right? In some ways, it's not their role. I mean, yes, they should be asking very hard questions to technically qualify if the solution is right.
Right.
But they don't necessarily have to be, getting the answers to Medic.
That's right. Well, and they don't have to ask for the money at the end of the day. Right. Like I do think SEs should be asking harder questions. Like, is there any reason that you wouldn't technically adopt this product at this point? Things like that, right? To validate that you actually have the technical win. But yeah, when you're in the room with someone saying, all right, give me $3 million. Everybody in your org agrees. Everyone in my org agrees. Give it to me. Right. Like that's a.
And then calling them every day, hounding them, where are we in the process? Where are we in the process? Because we all know very few buyers actually do what they say they're going to do in the timeline.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for reps, even though I've never been one. Like I know I couldn't do their job. Number one, I don't think it would be that fun. Number two, like I don't know if I would be good at dealing with legal and procurement and all these, like to have the patience that they have to go through these things and the tenacity. One of the things Chad and I talk about fairly regularly is this idea of like how sales is changing and how it's becoming much more technical and product led. Do you think we'll get to a point where we start to automate out some of the procurement processes, start to adopt smart contracts with legal so that we can make those parts of the process smoother and faster with less humans involved?
From your mouth to God's ears, we all go through this fairly complex negotiation to get an MSA in place.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody is negotiating the exact same things: confidentiality, indemnification, and limitation of liability. And it would be amazing if we could come together as an industry and say, these are the standard terms. Stop asking all of your vendors for unlimited liability. We're not going to give it to you, nor should we.
Do you think that we'll ever get to the point where we could actually, in an automated fashion, enable a company to spend millions of dollars on a piece of software versus having to talk to someone? Because right now, it's very easy to spend $30K on something. It's not so easy to spend 300 or 3 million.
In AWS, I think originally, I remember talking to them in the very, very early days. They had no plans to build enterprise sales teams or hire SAs or anything like that. And they found that they were very limited in the types of deals that they were getting. And then they rapidly ramped up a huge enterprise sales team and, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, because if they didn't, they were just going to lose on the market. So they did seem to hit a wall in terms of how much money they could make from a customer without having an enterprise sales team.
Relationships matter. I mean, I remember I learned this lesson early in my career. So when I was building JBoss, I was very fortunate to work alongside a gentleman by the name of Bob Bickle, and Bob was a great advisor to us and eventually became, our head of strategy. And we were interviewing our first or second and third salespeople to hire, right? And we had 2 candidates, and if you took the 2 of them on paper, right, you clearly would decide one way 10 out of 10 times. But then when you met them and you talked to them, you would make the other decision 10 out of 10 times, because one of them was really likable and really personable, and the other had no personality whatsoever. People buy things from people that they like. I'll tell another funny this is a JBoss story as well, but I actually got fired from Red Hat. I'll put that on record. So after the acquisition, they decided to demote my entire team. And because I'm a leader who cares deeply about the people that work for me, I asked the leadership of Red Hat some really hard questions. And, one of the things that at the time their president of sales said to my whole team, when one of those reps asked a question and said, what about all the companies that we've built relationships with that are our customers?
Yeah.
And his answer was, companies don't build relationships with salespeople. They build relationships with companies. And to that, I was a little, more brash in my younger years. I in a large room, I'm like, that has to be one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Any salesperson who's not building relationships with the people that they're selling to that works in my organization is just not doing their job. That human element and the relationship is so important, especially if you're serving in critical infrastructure for your customers, right? Because look, Chad, we talked about this earlier in the podcast. I mean, AWS went down on Monday. It's the relationship that helps things recover.
Ben, what are your thoughts on the customer success organization and what they're actually responsible for, and how do you measure them? Because I've worked at a couple companies now and that's a relatively new thing. I mean, it didn't exist when I got into being an SA, but now it seems to be everywhere, and I don't really understand what their job is.
I think it just really depends on the company. I mean, I will say from the past at Okta, customer success was weaved into everything that we did. We had regular cadences with our customers. Customer success has a lot of personalities. I think the pure relationship customer success is okay in non-technical organizations. I think when your customer is deeply technical, you need to think differently about customer success. Customer success is more about technical customer success than it is about account health per se. Obviously, the ultimate measurement of customer success we talked about it earlier, is, net retention rate.
Yeah, but I feel like sales and SAs and they're already comped in terms of making sure that the customer renews and grows and all of that. I feel like I'm one of the Bobs here. What would you say you do here? That's what I want to know.
I mean, I'm sure there's some organizations where you absolutely could ask that question over and over again, because they're probably not leveraging customer success as the way they should, per se.
But what would you? So you have a customer success, manager or whatever the role is called. What do you tell them to do? What does their day-to-day look like? And how's it different than what a salesperson is supposed to do or what a TAM is supposed to do? All these things should be proactively reaching out to customers.
Sure. So it could be, getting signals from product usage. There's products now that'll help surface error rates. So like you can, let's say, integrate with a Sentry and pull that into a revenue operations system. And so let's say you see a customer that's having high error rates for one reason or another. Be proactive, reach out to them, go talk to them before they submit a ticket. And then it's also monitoring utilization. So let's say you sell somebody 20,000 seats and you see that they're consistently have only deployed 5,000. Well, obviously there's a 15,000 seat churn risk. From a customer success perspective, I would be focusing on, how do I get adoption? In a lot of organizations, you could say, yeah, that's the salesperson and the SA's problem. But they sold the deal. There was a reason that somebody bought 20,000, but there's something blocking the implementation, and we need to figure that out from a customer success perspective.
I've sat in meetings with large banks where we were introducing, let's say, a new CSM, and the customer was just so confused. They were like, okay, I understand that when I want to buy something, I call this person, the rep. I understand that when I have a question about a tech thing, I call the SA. I understand that when I have a problem, I'll talk to my TAM and they'll open the ticket for me and interact with support org on my behalf. When would I call you, right? You're sort of talking about it like it's this internal person who maybe helps the sales team figure out how customers are using the software, could be using it better and all that. But they're also being fronted as like an external contact for the customer. And the customer doesn't know when to call that person.
That's just bad communication. There should never be a mystery of when I contact this customer success person.
So when should a customer contact a customer success manager?
When they need anything. Like if you're doing customer success right, that should always be your first point of contact. If you are building a good cohesive team, your sales reps should trust that your customer success team is going to do a great job, right? Because happy customers buy more software, and you should help encourage your customers to talk to your customer success team, right? So when the customer reaches out to you, the sales rep, because that's where they had the best relationship, it should behoove you to build that relationship and be the bridge between your customer and your customer success team, so they get to the point where they're as comfortable with your customer success folks as they are with you and your solutions architect.
Ben, I think this is kind of similar. I was curious to get your perspective on this. What's it like to be a head of sales or a CRO for a company where the founder is usually an engineer and they become the CTO, CEO? Like, what are the great things about that, and what are some things that maybe you're frustrating about that?
I tend to really enjoy that scenario, because while I'm not a technologist, I'm pretty dangerous, and I tend to get to a really good level of understanding for what we're doing, and that tends to really endear me to that technical founder, because at the end of the day, they want people around them that they can trust and they can talk to, and people that understand a little bit more and are not just, I don't want to understand the technology, let's just build a machinery around it. The best technical founders know that go-to-market's not their forte. One of the things that I love about Alan, who I work with now, is he's incredibly self-aware. We went into a meeting last week. He's like, look, I'm going to ask you guys some questions that you may think are stupid, but this is an area that I don't know anything about, so I'm just trying to learn. There's something that's just so nice about that.
It's a great answer. I agree with you. I mean, I think I've worked for only companies where the technical founders were the leaders, and they're super curious, so they learn very quickly. And sure, they might not trust this or that, or like have no experience in this area, so they hesitate a little more than usual. But in general, I've just found it to be great because part of it, of course, I'm an SE, so I'm technical. So I like to work for people that are technical because I think they appreciate me more, but I also appreciate them more. Chad, any more questions? You think we're good?
No, I think we should bring this balloon back down to the ground, Steve. Ben, I want to thank you for coming today. We love talking to people who are great at what they do, the best at what they do in this space, and you certainly fall into that, and I appreciate you giving us 2 hours of your time today. This has been a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Well, yeah, Steve, Chad, really appreciate the time. I enjoyed the conversation. Steve, it was great to meet you.
Same, Ben.
Especially considering we've been running in the same circles for quite some time.
We are ships passing in the night, it seems.
Absolutely. And Chad, it was always a pleasure to connect with you. So
every time I talk to you, I learn something, and I come away just happier than I was before the conversation started.
Awesome. Then we've solved what we needed to solve.
All right, everybody, share this episode out on LinkedIn so we can help get the word out. Of course, we have a good following already, very strong following, and we can always spike those numbers a little bit more. So help us get the word out. Anybody who's in tech sales, tech pre-sales, or anything in the tech space, I think this podcast should be interesting to them and help us grow our audience. We appreciate it.